So today, I really like this lesson. It is going to be genetic mutations. Without mutations, we would still be single-celled organisms floating around in the ocean. But after 3.5 billion years of evolution caused by mutation, here we are. I think there's a t-shirt that says you are the product of 3.5 billion years of mutation. Start acting like it. Huh? Start acting like it. Okay, so first off, what exactly is a mutation? A gene mutation is a permanent change to the DNA sequence or to the genomic sequence. So if you had a gene sequence that looked like this, and then you experienced a mutation, that's permanent. There it is. That's your mutation. There's no going back. Now, there are some mutations that you can pass on to your offspring. There are some mutations that are just going to be with you. But the key thing with these mutations, and this is why they can be so impactful, is that if you change the gene sequence, you're likely going to change the proteins that you need in order to actually function. So a change in the genes may, and I'm not going to say will, there's a difference between will and may. A change in genes may result in a change in proteins. And the proteins is what is really important, because the proteins is what makes us us. There are proteins that help to make your bone, your organs, your connective tissues. More than 50% of your actual weight is protein. When you go to Publix, you stand on that scale, hey mom, look how much I weigh. More than 50% of that is just protein. So they're pretty important. If you are changing the recipe for them, you're going to get some different outcomes. If you recall, last week I had the entire gene sequence for hemoglobin on the whiteboard. One letter out of like 50 is what causes normal hemoglobin to result in sickle cell anemia. Now, some mutations can be inherited from generation to generation, but in order for those to be passed on, can you tell me what cells would have to be affected by a mutation in order for you to be pass them on? You're on the right track. Not necessarily sex cells, but what cells become your sex cells? Annie? Yeah. So these are called germline mutations. I was born without wisdom teeth. My dad was too. And I don't know about his father or his father's father or so on and so on. Somewhere on my dad's side of the family, that mutation happened. And it is apparently it was at least in my dad's germline cells, because his germline cells made his sperm cells, which is what made half of me. So it's woven in my DNA too. And I would likely pass it on to the next generation as well. So germline mutations occur in germline cells. And if you don't recall, germline cells become your sperm and your egg. So if you experience a mutation to your sperm or your egg, it's highly likely that you're going to pass it on to next generations. Most you guys take world history 10th grade, right? How late do you get into world history? Like, it's currently 2021. What's the most recent year you get up to in world history? Do you get to the World War II?
Yeah.
Do you get to Vietnam? Or is that American history? Past Vietnam? You go all the way to. Do you ever talk about Chernobyl? You think past 1800s? Well, let me give you a quick history lesson. You all know that Russia used to be the USSR, and it used to be a whole bunch of other countries like Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Belarus, all that stuff. Well, in April 26, 1986, reactor 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant melted down. It was the worst nuclear disaster in this planet's history. And a lot of people died. A lot of people died because of radiation exposure, cancer. Well, the people that were affected the most by the Chernobyl nuclear disaster were children. And a lot of the children weren't even born yet. Their parents, before their parents might have even met each other, before they were conceived, their parents' germline cells were permanently mutated by all that radiation. And mutated germline cells results in mutated sperm and egg. And mutated sperm and egg can result in a mutated offspring. And so lots and lots of children in that time era, 80s, 90s, they were born with deformities, they were born with cancer, they were born with birth defects because of their parents' DNA was like permanently altered by all that radiation. So germline mutations are passed on, but somatic mutations typically are not. Hartley, what does it mean to be somatic? Yeah, your body cells. Somatic mutations occur in somatic cells. That should be easy enough. You know, my dad is an Iowa farm boy. Iowa's in the Midwest, very flat, a lot of corn. And he just worked and worked and worked outside all the time. And when he moved to Florida, he worked and worked and worked and worked all the time outside. And he was out in the sun for decades and decades. And now he's 76. And every time I go and see him, he's got something new growing on his skin. Well, even when I was growing up, he had a little cancer on his lip that got cut off, and a cancer on his ear cut off, and a cancer on his arm cut off, all from sun damage. Well, if he got a little skin cancer on his arm, you're not going to pass that on to your children. So when you guys go to the beach, if you get a little too much UV radiation, you go to your dermatologist, and the dermatologist says, I don't like that mole on your back or your arm. Let's take a look at that. They biopsy it, and they go, yeah, it's precancerous. We got to cut that out. That's not going to go to your offspring. You're going to be fine. Your offspring will be fine. So somatic mutations simply occur in your somatic cells. They're not inherited. However, I will say this. The propensity to get something like cancer is hereditable. Where someone like Angelina Jolie, Brad Pitt's ex-wife, Maleficent, she had a very high likelihood of getting breast cancer. It ran in her family. Mom had it, grandma had it. She was a high risk. So she went ahead and got a step ahead of the curve, and she just went and got a double mastectomy. So she wouldn't have to deal with what just the horrors that cancer treatment can actually be, how bad it can get. So she didn't want to deal with all that. So she just got a double mastectomy. If you know what that means, they remove both her breasts. She got breast implants to replace them. And she's cancer-free as far as I know. But sometimes certain lineages can actually have a high propensity for maybe breast cancer or pancreatic cancer or liver cancer. It might run in your family, which is why you really have to keep an eye on yourself and check yourself regularly. So what are some causes of mutations? Well, in X-Men, totally random. There's basically two types of causes. Some just are out of the clear blue sky. Totally random. Others are influenced by environmental factors. So the ones that are totally random are called spontaneous mutations. In fact, I know someone who works at Moffitt Cancer Center, and when she's going on about her day and the kind of patients she was dealing with, she might mention this one guy had cancer. It was so bad. I mean, we had to rip his mouth apart to get to the tumor. And I would say, wow, she would show me photos. Like, that's pretty intense. Was it spontaneous or was it induced? And sometimes it's spontaneous. Sometimes it's induced. And spontaneous could be you follow all the rules. You don't partake in any risky behaviors like smoking. You eat healthily. What else? You don't expose yourself to toxic chemicals. Well, a spontaneous mutation is just completely random. It's just due to a typo in the DNA replication process. It's just nature's oops. And this, you have safeguards to prevent this. We have checkpoints. We have P53. We have DNA polymerase 3, which is like looking with a magnifying glass, trying to catch any errors. You have all these safeguards. But guys, we have 3 billion, with a B, DNA bases. You're gonna miss one here and there. This Sunday is the Super Bowl. Tom Brady's gonna throw some passes. I guarantee you he will not be perfect. He's not gonna be like 35 for 35. So if he can't be 35 for 35 throwing a football, you think our cellular processes are gonna be 3 billion for 3 billion? Unlikely. So despite your safeguards, you just have these natural mistakes. And that's what mutations are, just random errors. And sometimes the errors can be good and sometimes they can be bad. And then you have the other type, which is known as an induced mutation. An induced mutation is typically a result from an exposure to a mutagen. If a carcinogen is a cancer-causing substance, what's a mutagen? It's a mutation-causing substance. Now, yes or no? All mutations are cancer? No. Yes or no? All cancers are mutations? Yes. So just because you have a mutation doesn't mean that it is cancerous. Many of you have blue eyes in here. That's a mutation. Or green. If you don't have brown eyes, that's a mutation. If you don't have dark skin, that's a mutation. I mean, no, darker than him. Like African American or just African. That's where all humans originated from. So if you don't look like that, you're mutated. Yeah. Yes, crossing over is guaranteed variation from generation to generation. That's intended to mix things up. This is just total anomalies. It occurs all the time. It's very slow, but they occur from generation to generation. Most of them you don't even notice. Sometimes they do become present, or not present, but apparent. Yeah.
Why are like some spontaneous mutations like more common than others? Like the girl with 2 different eyes and stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
Like why is that? Why do we see that a lot as a mutation, but not like something born without an ear or something? Or something like that major.
Somebody born without an ear could be a deficiency during gestation. You know, if you have someone that might have one arm that's normal length and another arm that might be maybe half the length it should be, that's not necessarily a mutation. That just might be a birth defect where, you know, you don't know if that mother was drinking and smoking. You don't know if perhaps the baby was developing improperly. So that doesn't necessarily, that disorder isn't necessarily written in their genetics where it says mutated arm, missing ear. But when you have something like heterochromia, that is written in their code, and they could pass it on to the next generation.
Is it like a more complicated code? Like, is that why it gets messed up more often?
It depends on which genes are mutated. You have these genes called PAX6 genes, which affect your eyes. You have the HOX genes, which affect your body shape, which all organisms share. So if those genes are affected in any way, and all it takes is one little change, that could affect any given part of your body. Okay, and I'll just go and throw this in there in case you all didn't know. Carcinogens are cancer-causing, that's not how you spell it. Carcinogens are cancer-causing substances. So let me ask you this. Are all carcinogens mutagens? Yeah. Are all mutagens carcinogens? No. Not every mutation is cancer. Okay, so when it goes to spontaneous mutations, I'm just going to talk now. Spontaneous mutations typically happen in 1 out of 1 billion base pairs. So every time you copy about 1 billion base pairs, you can expect at least 1 mutation at a time. Now we have 3 billion, so if you were to copy your entire DNA, you might get 3 errors. That's pretty good. But you are replicating your DNA all the time. Every 3 seconds, 40,000 of your cells are destroyed just naturally. They're old, get rid of them. They go through apoptosis, which means 40,000 new cells must replace them. That means 40,000 new copies of your DNA. There's going to be an error somewhere. You know, a lot of times that's how cancer happens, where you have your normal healthy DNA, and then a few cells have mutated DNA that's really, really bad, that can grow uncontrollably. And hopefully you can destroy it before it gets really out of hand and forms a tumor. All right, now I want to switch over to some images from your PowerPoint. So here is heterochromia. 1 blue eye, 1 brown eye. Does anyone know someone that is heterochromia? I've never known one. I mean, I've seen them, but I've never known someone. You do not have better vision in one eye versus the other. But one thing I would hypothesize is I bet that person has more light sensitivity in their blue eye. For those of you who have blue eyes, do you have trouble seeing during the day on a really bright day? Yeah, I do too. It sucks. And there was a baseball player in 2008 who was the MVP of the league, and he hit home runs everywhere. That's why he was the MVP. But that was at night. During the day, he couldn't hit a beach ball with a tennis racket. He was terrible. And they compared his stats at nighttime games versus daytime games. It was like 2 different people. So he went to a doctor. He's like, "Doc, I can't see the ball at all. My statistics are terrible. I'm awful during the game. The coach is just going to bench me during the day games. What can I do?" And the doctor looked at him and goes, "Yeah, you have blue eyes. There's this thing called the sun that your eyes are very sensitive to. So there's this new invention called sunglasses. You should wear them. And there's UV blockers. Get some Ray-Bans." So he got some Ray-Bans. He was fine. So it's really not that complicated. Get some sunglasses if you struggle to see during the day. But I can tell you, when I'm driving on a day like today, I'm like this. It's tough. I'll have one eye closed, the other eye barely open. Because when you guys wake up in the morning, maybe your mom comes barging in your bedroom and says, "Wake up, time for school." And you're like, "Oh, God, Mom, turn off the light." Your eyes haven't adjusted. It's actually painful for all that light to get into your eyes because your pupils are like this. And when you turn on the light, your pupils do this. So when someone turns on the light, your pupils are huge. Way too much light comes in, and it actually hurts. That can actually damage your eyes if you look at really bright sources like the sun. Yes?
So, like, I have, like, naturally really big pupils. Is that, like, a mutation, or would that just be because of the blue eyes?
It's not because of the blue eyes. I can get back to you on that one. I know someone that's the same way. I can ask her because her pupils don't constrict at all. She's always like this. So, yeah, don't stare at the sun. Okay, Ayla? That might be bad. I'll look into that. I'll ask. All right, here is an induced mutation. Check that out. This frog was taken from a lake in Minnesota. Just like Florida is called the Sunshine State, Minnesota is called the land of 10,000 lakes. Back during the Ice Age, a lot of glaciers just dug into the ground in Minnesota. And as the glaciers retreated back towards Canada and the Arctic Circle, their footprints, so to speak, were left behind. And that's what formed the lakes. Well, during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there were a lot of factories and power plants that were along the edges of these lakes, and they would dump their toxins and their poisons into the lakes themselves, and there was a lot of wildlife like frogs and fish that were just getting very weird mutations. They would have lots of legs or no legs at all or deformed legs and so on and so forth. This frog has 7 legs. There's its normal, regular hind legs. Then you have these 3 weird things coming out the side. This was all caused by pollution. This is caused by a mutagen, the toxins of whatever was in that pollution. Now, when I made this PowerPoint a long time ago, smoking was sometimes an issue, but not many teenagers would smoke cigarettes back just 10 years ago. It wasn't that big of an issue. But nonetheless, I would show them all the different chemicals and carcinogens and mutagens that are present in cigarettes. Well, now you have vaping, and that presents an entirely new spectrum of chemicals and whatnot that a lot of people tend to think are harmless. But I want to remind you, because I have walked in on my own students vaping before, and it's very disappointing when I see that, despite what I tell you guys in class. You are vaporizing oils and letting them condense back into liquid oil in your lungs. It's causing a brand new condition called, the best thing they can call it is chemical pneumonia, where you have this sludgy stuff that forms in your lungs and you can't breathe. So they have to be put on respirators or even have lung transplants. Not something that you want to partake in. So it took us about 50 years to figure out cigarettes are bad. We are in our infancy in what vaping does to the body. Do you truly want to be a guinea pig for that and be on the wrong side of medical discovery and history? It's not something you should get involved in. Ask any doctor. You ask them, what does vaping do to the body? They'll say, we don't know. We don't know. Not a good answer. Then check this out. More induced mutation. When I was in college in Fort Myers, one of our professors told us to drive out to Immokalee, Florida. Immokalee, Florida is located in southern Florida, about 45 miles from Naples. And it is like walking into a time machine. It is the land that time forgot. There's no restaurant chains, not even a Burger King or a McDonald's. Last time I was there. There's one high school, there's one elementary school, and we went to the hospital. And we saw these babies that looked like this. And this is what the professor wanted us to see. Nowhere else in the United States of America will you see more babies born without arms or legs than in Immokalee, Florida, because it's a mostly migrant population, a lot of Hispanics, and they work in the fields. Strawberries, soybeans, and all, sugarcane's a big one. And when I was driving through Immokalee, I kid you not, I saw an airplane spraying toxins over the field where people were working. Now, I don't know if it was herbicide, which kills weeds, or if it was pesticide, which kills bugs. But these people working in the fields were being exposed to all these chemicals, these mutagens, and it affected their germline cells, and it affected their sperm and egg. And this is the result. So this really started to make the national attention in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and I haven't been back there since 2007. When I went there, I felt like I was high off the air. We had a ping pong table in our dorm, and we would play ping pong all the time. I would take my paddle, I'd be like, I couldn't even focus on the ball. And that lasted 2 days just from breathing the air out there. It was messed up. So it was definitely a big problem. I haven't looked into seeing if they've resolved it. I certainly hope they have, because that's just terrible. No more, or you would not find more limbless children in this country than in Immokalee, Florida. And it was all because the workers work in those fields, exposed to all those chemicals. All right, let's go back to this now. So exactly, what are the different types of mutations? So we talked about what mutations are, the two different types of mutations, or causes of mutation. Now let's talk about the types of mutation. So the first one is going to be called a point mutation. This is where we really get into what you might see on the AP exam. A point mutation is also called a substitution mutation. This is a change to a single nucleotide. It can possibly change the amino acid, and that's where it really matters. Okay, so I'm going to copy what I have on the whiteboard a little bit. No, I'm not. I'm going to do something different. So if I have DNA, and I have TAC, I'm just going to make some stuff up. CCA. Well, the opposite of that would be ATG, GGT. So if you actually look at this, guys, I have 4 codons. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I want you guys to actually see what effect this can cause. This is all going to be a domino effect. You knock one domino down, you can knock down the whole system. If this is ATG, the RNA would be UAC. We got CCA, GGU, and last one is AUG. So all of those are RNA, mRNA to be exact. And you all know that mRNA codes for amino acids. I asked you all to memorize one amino acid. What does AUG code for? Methionine. So I'll just put MET for methionine. For GGU, I'm going to have to look that one up. GGU is glycine. CCA, that's proline. And UAC is tyrosine. Okay. So I have the amino acids here. Now, let's see. Jet, I want you to just tell me any one letter you want to mutate and change to another one. So let me put it to like this. You see how this first one is TA? I want you to flip any one of them, just reverse them. So like if you want to do the first one, you flip it to be A on top, T on the bottom. So which pair would you like to flip?
G and C on the bottom.
Well, there's 3 sets, the first, second, or third one.
The green G and the yellow C.
All right, you got it. Okay, so Jet wanted to flip those 2. All right, so rule number 1. Guys, is this going to affect the blue or gray highlighted ones? No, those are going to be unaffected. Let's take a look at this. So he changed TAC to TAG. What will the new mRNA be? AUC. Is that going to be methionine? Nope. AUC is threonine. And he chose ATC. That's going to change it to UAG. And what's that going to be? UAG. That's a stop codon. Yikes. So this would be a mutation that would definitely affect the protein because it changed the actual amino acids. We went from methionine to threonine, and we went from tyrosine to a stop codon where you're terminating the protein. This type of mutation that Jet just expressed here is called a missense mutation. A missense mutation is a change in the DNA sequence that does result in altered proteins. Missense mutation. If you want to put it in layman's terms, you guys probably know my first name is Kurt. If you change that K to an F, is that going to change how you say my name? That would be a missense mutation. If you change the DNA to where the protein is different, that's missense. All right. Now, let me think of another one. If I had the sequence, the DNA C, 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 this will result in the mRNA G, G, G. Let's see what the amino acid, AA, would be. Amino acid. G, G, G. That's glycine. Okay? Now, hold on, Annie. If you got to go, you got to go. Let's talk about a mutation. I want to change this C into a G. So watch this. C, C, G. That's my mutation. That's a point mutation, which means I'm now going to have G, G, C as my RNA. And let's see, G, G, C. Well, look at that. It's still glycine. I'm not making this up. I want you guys to see for yourself. Look at that. Start in the middle and work your way out. G, G, C. Glycine. This is known as a silent mutation. A silent mutation is a change in the DNA that does not alter the protein. So imagine this. You spell my name with, here's how you spell my name, K-U-R-T. What if you spelled it C-U-R-T? Is that going to change how you pronounce it? No. Then therefore, that would be a silent mutation. And then there's one more that's in this little set. I'm going to go ahead and get to it. It's called a nonsense mutation. This is where a mutation results in a premature stop codon. So this is going to result in it will likely result in a non-functional protein. So if you spelled my last name to full length, T-H-O-R-E-S-O-N, that's normal. But if you had a nonsense mutation, here's how it would look like. T-H-O, stop. Oops. You prematurely terminated the protein. It stopped before it should have. That is called a nonsense mutation. All right. I have about 2 minutes, so I'm going to try to get a couple more in there. We have an addition, which is also called an insertion mutation. This is where an extra nucleotide is added. So normally, Ryan's name is R-Y-A-N. An insertion mutation would be like R-J-Y-A-N. And that's a frame shift too. This is accompanied by a frame shift. Ryan, I know you would never allow this, but if somebody skipped in front of you in line, you'd have to scoot back, right? Well, that's called a frame shift. You have to adjust for that person coming in. Well, his R would have to move backwards in order to make room for that J. This is known as a frame shift mutation. And lastly, the opposite of addition is a deletion, which is a nucleotide is removed and it is not replaced. So if I have Ryan's name, R-Y-A-N, a deletion would be like R-A-N. All right. Perfect.